Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank you for participating in this training via Zoom and by telephone. This presentation is being recorded for distribution after the training with the accompanying slides to all registrants. My name is Sharon Franklin. I am the Chief of Operations for the Center for Health, Environment, and Justice, a project of People's Action Institute. For those of you not familiar with CHEJ, our primary work involves providing grassroots organizing, political engagement, and technical assistance to community-based groups and organizations nationwide. Our presenter today is Mary Grace Wolf. She is a principal at Innovative Fundraising, LLC, and has facilitated hundreds of fundraising trainings and mindset workshops. She has been working in the grassroots fundraising for over 19 years and has experience as a fundraising canvasser, canvas director, development associate, director of individual giving, and fundraising director. Mary Grace specializes in raising money from individuals and training other staff, leaders, and board members to do the same. Her approach is twofold. You need to have the skills it takes to raise real money from individuals, and you need to have the right mindset about money and fundraising. Today's presentation will be for 15 to 20 minutes, and then we will open the floor up for questions. We plan to answer as many questions as time allows, and we will close promptly at 1 p.m. Eastern. Before we get to Mary Grace, I have a few housekeeping items I want to discuss briefly. We have over 120 people registered for this training, and in order to eliminate background noise, everyone has been automatically muted. When you have a question during the presentation, please identify yourself with your name and organization and put your questions in the chat. They will be answered during the Q&A session. After we have responded to the chat questions, please raise your hand and unmute yourself and ask your question. For those on the telephone, please wait until we have responded to the questions in the chat and raised hands. We will ask if there are any questions from individuals joining by telephone. At that time, please press *6 to unmute yourself on your telephone and ask your question. After you have asked your question, please press *6 again to mute yourself to keep the background noise to a minimum. All right, welcome, Mary Grace. We're so glad to see you. And you are actually on mute right now.
I'm off mute now. Yes, thank you. Should I take it away, Sharon?
Take it away.
Okay. Well, hello, everyone. I hope everyone's having a good beginning of their day, first half of their day. I'm really excited to be with you, and I've really been looking forward to this. I love doing trainings and just helping people thinking through how to raise more money for their important work and their good organization. So thanks for giving me the chance, and thanks for being here today. I know it's lunch hour for a lot of you, so I appreciate it. As Sharon said, I'm Mary Grace. I use she, her pronouns, and I run Innovative Fundraising, which is a fundraising, consulting, and coaching firm. We work with progressive organizations across the country to help them raise more money in lots of ways, many of which we're going to dig into today. And then, like Sharon said, we'll do a pretty substantial Q&A, so you guys will have time to talk through some things. I live in Aurora, Illinois, which is about 50 miles west of Chicago. You would only know of it if you know the movie Wayne's World. Otherwise, you will not know of it. But I live here with my wife and 2 children who keep me really busy. So let's go ahead and dive in. If we can put the slides up. Great. So yeah, so the title of this is Money Power. We're going to get into that a little bit more in just a minute, why we're talking about power. Money Power 101 and fundraising training. So here's what we're going to go over today in broad strokes. We're going to talk about money and power and why you need those things to be successful in your organizations. We're going to talk about where funding comes from. And we're going to talk about how to tell our stories as individuals, as the group, and how to use those stories to raise money. And then I have some proposed next steps for everybody before we open up for the Q&A. So, typically when we think of power in our nonprofit organizations doing good work, the main thing that we think of is how many people do we have? So that might be, which this is really, really important. How many people just going to use CHEJ as an example, can CHEJ mobilize to come out to a public meeting, to a protest, to a planning meeting, et cetera, a conference, whatever the thing is. So organized people is really, really powerful. And we know that social movements in our country just frankly wouldn't exist without a lot of organized people. The thing that often gets, I think, ignored or swept under the rug is organized money. And this is a really, really substantial and significant source of power. Unfortunately, we live in a capitalist society, and I'm not going to be able to change that in my lifetime, I don't think. And so I have really leaned in and embraced, how can I be helpful to raise as much money as possible for good, important, progressive work? And so it's really important that you have enough money to pay for all the things that you're doing as an organization, quite simply, pay your staff, pay your bills, keep the lights on, et cetera, et cetera. But also that you have some money in the bank and that you have security. That security, at least to me, really is power for the slightly longer haul. So we're going to talk about money today. So let's talk about where funding comes from. You guys are familiar with some or all of these sources. Foundations, so that's grant writing, extremely important. And you know, what's so interesting to me about the grant money that our types of organizations get is that there's so much more out there. As you may know, foundations only are required to release 5% of their money each year, which boggles my mind every time I think about it. So we live in the wealthiest country in the history of the world. There's a lot of money to be had from foundations, so we should definitely be going after that for our work. Government money, a little bit trickier sometimes. I don't know if anybody on here has had experience with government grants, but there are a lot of strings attached. But again, there's a lot of money available, particularly in the last few years, for good social justice efforts and organizations. And so should definitely be tapping into that. A lot of my clients get money from unions in lots of different ways, sometimes straight up donations to an organization. Sometimes it's through event sponsorship or just programmatic sponsorship. But unions do, the thing about unions is that they have, in many cases, not all, but in many cases, a pretty hefty line item in their budget that is reserved for donations for a partner organization. So if you're in relationship with unions, you should be asking them for money, is the bottom line, because they most likely have it unless they're a really small, faction of a union. Corporations. So some of our groups have mixed emotions about taking corporate money, which I totally understand. However, if there are no strings attached and there are no problematic red flags with taking corporate money, I'm of the mindset that you should do that corporations are making money. Most of it is not going to great things. And if they give a percentage of it to good work like yours, I'm all for it. But you have to make that decision for your own organization. And then the one that we're going to spend more time on today, and we'll go over the reasons why, is individuals. So straight up regular folks like those of us on the call and our friends, families, neighbors, community members, et cetera, who share our values and make a donation to the work that we're doing. And before we go to the next slide, what's interesting to me is that a lot of times when I tell folks what I do for a living, that I'm in nonprofit fundraising, it's usually one of two things. They either think, oh, you sit and write grants all day, so you're a grant writer, all this money comes from foundations, or corporations, or they say, oh, you sit and talk to rich people all day. And I'm here to tell you that those two things are not true at all. And so I'm going to debunk some myths for a second. So first of all, what's really interesting is that the average percentage year to year, it fluctuates a bit year to year, but the average percentage of the overall nonprofit pie of money that is given to nonprofits in the United States, about 65 to 70% of that comes from individuals. And only about I think it's technically 4.5% of that individual money comes from quote unquote mega donors. So some of you, or maybe everybody on the call, has heard of Mackenzie Scott, Jeff Bezos' ex-wife, who has been incredibly generous and given away millions and millions and millions of dollars. And she gets all of the media attention. And I think that's great. And I wish that I knew Mackenzie Scott, and that would be really fun to be friends with her. But the truth of the matter is, it's actually way more money that's coming from regular folks like us on the call. So I do a lot of work with my clients constantly, trying to retrain them. It's not about finding the wealthy elite. There are some wealthy progressives that will give money to our work, but that's not actually where the majority of the money is. So it's interesting to think about how you build your more like grassroots and mid-level donor programs. That's going to give you the most sustainability for your work over time and in the immediate. That's one thing. And also, I think, based on the media, you would think that corporations and foundations are giving the most money to nonprofits in the US, but they're not. What they're giving money to and what the wealthy elite are giving money to are health. So hospitals, that's why you see hospital wings with names on them. They're giving money to hospitals, they're giving money to the arts, and they're giving money to colleges and universities. So something to think about. Okay, next slide, please. So why individuals? I started touching on this a little bit, but just to put a fine point on why this is the best money that you can go after and get for your organizations, in my opinion. It doesn't mean it's easy, but it is the best money. One is autonomy. The second is resilience. And the third is that you have accountability to your own people and not a corporate donor, not a foundation, not somebody who's going to give $1 million. Although if somebody offers you $1 million, you should totally take it. So please don't misunderstand me. But it's better to be accountable to your supporters, your base, your membership, your donors, however you describe them. So let's get into the nitty gritty. And I'm happy when we go to Q&A to answer any more specific questions about this. And I'm also going to share my contact information. So happy to be in touch with folks after this too. But here are some of the most popular and tried and true fundraising and stewardship tactics that probably some of you are already doing some of these things, but that, I'm encouraging you to think through if it makes sense. Yes, we'll also share the slide deck, definitely. If it makes sense to introduce one or two or more of these tactics into your plan. Before I do that though, when I say stewardship tactics, all that means is thanking donors. So fundraising that's easy to understand. We're making asks in a variety of different ways, potentially. Stewardship is when you get a touch from the group that you give money to, but they're not asking you to give money. So for example, a phone call thanking you, a newsletter updating you, an email with information, as long as that doesn't have an ask, that's considered a stewardship touch. And the best practice is that we thank donors without asking them 6 to 7 times a year, which means you need to plan for it. It's a lot. So in terms of things you can actually do to bring in money and or steward your donors. So my favorite thing, because you will get the biggest bang for your buck, and there's a whole other training on this that you guys can reach out for me or reach out to me to do this with your organization if you're interested, are individual donor visits. And so what that looks like just quickly is that's a one-on-one, not a community organizing one-on-one, but a one-to-one conversation, either in person or it can be on Zoom or whatever platform you use, where you're getting to know the donor more They're getting to know you more. You're talking about the work that your organization does, and you're asking for a meaningful, significant gift from them, which means different things for different people, different donors. Some people it's significant to give $500. Some people it's significant to give $5,000, right? So it just depends upon the donor and the situation. But we see a high rate of success with that personal touch and that one-on-one conversation, as you can imagine. So the second thing that we have listed here are funder briefings. This really could say funder and or donor briefings, because you can do these with your institutional partners, meaning your program officers, program directors, whoever you talk to at foundations or corporations that give you money, and or individual donors, depending upon what you have at your organization, who you have more of, and what makes sense. But a funder briefing also could be in person. Typically these days is on Zoom, is online, just because people are really spread out and it's easier that way. But it's basically 1 or 2 or 3 speakers who speak about the organization, and then a financial pitch. So here's where we are towards our budget. Here's what we need. We'll follow up with you individually. So it's a really good way to get information out, to gather your supporters, and frankly, for your supporters to see who the other supporters are on Zoom, which can be very helpful. Direct mail, old school, still very effective, tried and true. So the key things that I would say about direct mail are that you need to send at least 3 direct mail pieces per year for 2 or 3 years before you can really analyze the results. So this is where people, when I say this, they look at me and they go, oh, that's disappointing. I would like to send out a direct mail piece right now and make a lot of money. And I would like to do that too. But what we have learned is that direct mail is one of those things that's slow and steady wins the race. You have to get your list to warm up to it if they are not already used to direct mail. So it does take several rounds of sending out direct mail before you can say, okay, this is working for our organization, or this isn't working as well as we wanted it to, and here are some things that we can tweak. But still really is very effective for many groups that I work with. Email fundraising, you all probably get just as many email fundraising messages every day as I do. So it still remains extremely effective for some organizations. And also, as you know, it's extremely easy to just delete emails. So the pros are that it's high volume, and the cons are that it is pretty impersonal, but lots of groups still raise money, obviously, through email. Phone fundraising is still relatively effective, I would say. So you all probably still get some phone calls asking you for money for different organizations you've supported in the past. And it is definitely a little bit more of a personal touch, or maybe a lot more of a personal touch than an email. Event fundraising, we could do a whole session on any of these topics, including event fundraising. The thing about event fundraising is that a lot of groups will spend a lot of time and money putting on an event, and then they'll raise money, but they won't net that much money. Do you know what I mean? So there's not that much money that gets into their bank accounts. That's the problem with event fundraising. So whenever I'm doing or working on an event with a client, that's always my first question is, how much do we need to raise? How little can we spend with this still being a nice event so that we can net as much as possible? And sometimes if you can't make the numbers work, it doesn't make sense to do an event, So you have to ask yourself those questions. Sponsorship is something that you all have probably seen in the past too. So companies, small businesses, organizations, coalitions, and even individuals will often do a sponsorship. I'll give you $500 or $2,500 for your event, or even just your programmatic work, which is what we've seen an increase of since COVID, that the sponsorship requests are not always tied to an event. Often they still are. But sometimes a group just isn't doing their annual event anymore, or they're skipping a year, and they're still asking their sponsors to give money, and they're saying, here's what it's going to. It's going to the work that we're doing. Because sponsorship is that's just another way to ask for money, right? So it's just a different word. So we're seeing more of the programmatic sponsorships. And then text fundraising. You guys have probably gotten text fundraisers, or fundraising texts rather. I've gotten a lot from the Democratic Party lately. And they can be a little much, but they're also obviously very effective. So it just depends upon what route you want to go. Okay, next slide. Okay, so I'm going to go over the next few slides. Again, you all will get these slides, but I'm going to go over relatively quickly so that we can move to Q&A. But these are some prompts for you all after this session, after this workshop, where you could use these questions just for yourself, or also I would recommend using them for other staff members or volunteers or board members to get the ball rolling of how they talk about themselves in the work and how they talk about the work. So you can see the first piece here, you want people to answer these questions around their story of self. What drew me into this work initially? Why am I still here? What campaigns or other efforts have I been involved in this year? And why was that in my self-interest? And how was that work meaningful to me? What did I learn and how did I grow? So just doing some self-reflection, because honestly, one of the most effective fundraising tactics that I've found is sharing a little bit about myself. People love that and they respond by sharing about themselves. Okay, let's go to the next one. And then building off of that, the second piece here is the story of us. Us is your organization or your project or your effort. So what issues does the person you're talking to care about? What are their values? Hopefully their values are they match up with yours, which doesn't mean that they have to care about every single issue that your organization works on, but just generally that they support the work you do. And why would it be compelling to them to support financially? Next slide. And then the story of now. Why is this timely? Why is this urgent? Why do you want them to give and support now as opposed to 6 months or a year from now? So what campaigns or efforts are we currently engaged in? Why are they important? What are the costs if we lose, if we fail? And where are you planning to invest time in the coming year? And why is that important to you? So again, just the story of now. What's happening right now? Why should they contribute? Why should they be a part of this today? Okay. So my suggestions, I know I'm a little bit over time. My suggestions for next steps for everybody on the call are that after this, you pull a list of your current and past supporters. So do an inventory. So you might have that in a database or a CRM. You might have that in Google Sheets or a spreadsheet. It doesn't matter. But I would pull the list of everybody who's given you money and whatever records you have from them or of them over the last 5 years so you can see what you're working with. And then for the rest of this month or going into June, whatever your calendar allows, figure out the best way to think and update them. So the number one, just best thing you can do over the next few weeks is don't worry about asking them anything again. Just worry about thanking them and updating them. It will stand out to them because even though I said the best practice is 6 to 7 times a year, most groups don't do any stewardship at all. They don't do any thanking, or if they do it sort of by accident, like, well, we're just going to send out an email newsletter anyway. So it will stand out if you make a phone call or you send a personal email or whatever the thing is. And then the last 2 things are work on your plans. So I will admit that I'm less of a planner and more of a doer, but it is really important to have something written down. Here's the plan for the summer for fundraising. I'm going to reach out and do 10 individual donor visits. For example, we're going to send 3 fundraising emails. We're going to send fundraising texts in the month of July to all of our donors, asking them to be monthly givers. These are just examples that could be part of your plan. And then make sure, just building off that you develop projections for the rest of 2024. So September through December. Now, the somewhat easier part of that for the end of the year is that end of year giving is what you should be doing. So there's prep for that in September and October. There's work to be done on please make your end of year donation in November and or December. So anyway, that you can go ahead and slide that into your plan. But we can go to the next slide. Encourage folks to reach out to me. There's my email address so that we can talk more. And if you're interested in working with us, I would love to have I'd love to have that conversation. I also have in here, and I'll drop this in the chat, my firm is hosting a fundraising conference in September, and I won't spend time talking about it on this call because I know we want to get to Q&A, but you're all very much invited. So I'll drop that info in the chat for later. Okay, Sharon.
Thank you, Mary Grace. Okay, we have, it looks like some police and fire departments are always calling on the phone. You gotta love it.
They sure are. They sure are.
I know it. And we have a person from East Palestine, Jamie. She says, I'm new to this world. And then it looks like the question we have is from Cindy Hadger from Austin, Texas. How do you feel about using galas for raising money? I've heard they are out of fashion, but I also heard they raise a lot of money.
Yeah. So this is such a great question. It's not a straightforward answer. Cindy, Chorus Austin, maybe you can drop in the chat a little bit about that group. Thanks, Jamie. The not so helpful answer is that it totally depends upon the organization and who your base of members are, but I will expand on that. So you're right that there are a lot of organizations that still raise a ton of money through galas. So think of, people getting dressed up in fancy clothes. There's past hors d'oeuvres, there's cocktails, there's a dinner, maybe there's a silent auction, probably entertainment, those types of things that some of us may have been to. The general thing is that the types of organizations that raise a lot of money from galas are more charity-based nonprofits. And so what I mean by that is educational nonprofits, children's hospitals, things like that. What I see being a better fit for more nonprofits, particularly social justice groups, are sometimes events, but not events that are going to cost you so much money as a gala. Oldest civic choir in Austin. Okay, that's helpful. So what I would suggest if you guys are really wanting to do an event is figuring out how to have a fun event that doesn't cost you so much money. One client that I have in Chicago right now called the Chicago Reader, which is the progressive free paper in Chicago. They have an annual event they've had the last few years, for example, that's simply called the Ungala. So people dress in whatever they want to wear. And there's food and beverage and there's some entertainment, but it's not a fancy affair. You really could walk in jeans and that would be totally fine. Because they just know their base. They're just not going to raise a bunch of money in a fancy gala. So anyway, I can talk to you more offline about that, but that would be my suggestion. If your group really wants to do an event, try to do it low cost, fun, maybe funky, but unlikely a gala unless you already have that tradition in your organization.
Okay, we have Cindy. Can you come off of mute to do your question again? So a second question.
Oh, actually, it wasn't a question. It was just a comment that we are a chorus in Austin, and after the pandemic, quite a number of our grants, et cetera, have shifted, and that was the primary budget for our operating budget, and so we are trying to expand. So I appreciate, Mary Grace, your offer to speak offline, and I noted your email.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
And this is a question from Jane. I love it. Ungala is amazing. That came from Vicky. As environmental, and this came from, looks like Powder River. Oh, wait, they're coming in so fast.
Hold
Powder
on.
There's one from
Yeah,
Jamie.
I can go first.
You got 'em?
Jamie asks, is there a way to hold nonprofits accountable for accepting money for a community and not helping the community?
I mean, yeah, you can put them on blast. It's a little bit tricky, right? Because you have to, I think I understand the question and I've seen those scenarios before. I think you have to weigh the benefits and risks of being public about an organization, you know, that's not actually benefiting the community. Even though you might be totally right, there could be some blowback for your organization. So I think I would just think that through and make sure it doesn't hurt your organization in the longer run.
Okay, it looks like we have a from Powder River. As an environmental nonprofit, what type of event speaker are today's populations attracted to?
Well, so I have worked with quite a few environmental groups. I mean, I think it depends, but what I've seen is if you can get somebody who is kind of locally or regionally famous, and I use famous sort of like small f famous, but locally or regionally famous in the environmental world. So somebody that would be a name to attract people in your area, in your city or town or in your state. I think that's a good starting point. And then I don't think this is necessarily universal, but I also would say that elected officials at the local or state level, environmental folks and many of our other donors tend to also be inherently a bit or a lot political. So oftentimes having elected officials speak at your events is a draw for folks.
Okay, this is a question from Ashley Williams. What fundraising tools do you recommend? Are planning templates, any planning templates you can point us to? We use every action CRM, but it's pricey and I'm keeping our options open.
Yeah, great question. Okay, so in terms of templates, things that are in my Google Suite that I'm tracking, you know, my fundraising efforts and my stewardship efforts and things like that, I have templates. So if you just want to reach out to me after this, I can share some things with you and I'm happy to do that. And so that's one thing. In terms of external tools that I have found that I find helpful and that we use with our company, one is called iWave, which is a wealth prospecting tool. Some of you may have heard of Wealth Engine or other things like that. iWave is similar. And basically how we use it is, you know, if Hunter comes to me and is a client and says, okay, we'd like to get information about these top 10 donors, I'll run them through iWave and it will show me what other organizations his donors give to and at what amounts. So it's very helpful because then I can go back to Hunter and I can say, you know, Sharon Franklin gives you $200 a year, but she's giving $2,000 a year to this other thing. You should be asking Sharon Franklin for more money. That's an example. So there you go, Sharon. So iWave is one tool. But honestly, it's expensive. And so it's a perk for working with Innovative Fundraising. My clients do not pay for it. It's part of the relationship. And then the other thing that is similar in what I just said is more on the institutional fundraising side, and it's called Instrumental. I will drop this in the chat too. It's instrumental.com, instrumental without an A. And what that is it's essentially a prospect tool for grants. So, you know, somebody will come and say, we want to look at all the grants for environmental nonprofits in the state of Virginia that focus on youth organizing. And so I'll put those filters in and it'll spit out a list for me. It's neither of these tools are perfect. They are computers, they are AI, not human beings. So you have to then be the human being that goes through and make sure that these things make sense. But those are some tools I can recommend.
Okay, Helene has put a note in. She says, check out the Center for Coalfield Justice Dry Ersion, DRYERSON Festival for fundraising event ideas. Okay, it looks like Junelle Harris. This was extraordinarily helpful and so many suggestions. And then she says, what about an organization that's less than a year old and trying to find a fiscal sponsor to start fundraising from scratch? What,
Sorry, I'm just trying to find the question in the chat.
yes, it's
I see it.
1231.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, good for you for starting that. That sounds really important and incredible. So please schedule time with me because I have some thoughts about fiscal sponsors. I would definitely try to have a fiscal sponsor who you already have a good relationship with and you know the people there. There are a lot of groups that do fiscal sponsorship, and to be honest with you, I've heard a lot of horror stories, and so I would just be very choosy with who you choose to be your fiscal sponsor, because it is a important relationship. Let me just put it that way, financially for you. I would, if I were you, I would gather the board and your volunteers based on what you shared in the chat. I would gather the board and your volunteers, and I would start asking people to make lists of folks in their personal and professional and other networks that they think would contribute money to the organization. That's a starting point, right? And then the prompts that I put in the slides that we'll share with you, these are ways that you can get people comfortable talking about the organization. But you do have to have a list to go to. So that would be a starting point that I would have.
Okay, Vicky had a similar question, but her thing is, can you start before an organization is launched? And can you do a funder pitch to start an organization?
Yeah, you definitely can. I mean, the question back is, do you need to get paid? And I'm not being flippant about that, because sometimes there are people who start organizations who are able to be volunteers. But I assume you want to get paid. You should get paid for your work. We should all get paid. Well, I assume you want to get paid. I assume you want to be able to pay people. And even without that, you're going to have organizational expenses. So personally, I would not start an organization without a significant amount of money in the bank. But yes, of course, you can do a funder pitch to start an organization. And that's how really every organization in our country has ever been started. At one point, somebody had an idea and they made a pitch and they went from there. The advice that I can give you, which is not simple at all, but is to find at least one funder that can help rally the troops. So if you do a funder pitch on Zoom, for example, in a funder briefing, it is very, very helpful to have a program officer or a director or whomever from a foundation say, I really support this and we're throwing down and you should too. And, or maybe it's an individual donor or an investor or something that says that.
Okay, Ashley Williams is saying this is a fantastic and concise presentation, and she's one of your neighbors. She's in LaSalle County, and she's glad to hear from a neighbor.
Hi.
Okay, and Dr. Sandy, would you recommend a young grassroots organization, 3 years old, with a fiscal sponsor to reach out to funders for a conversation so that they can get to know us? We are having great difficulty securing funding.
Yes, I would definitely recommend that. Here's the challenge. Most of the time you can't, let me rephrase. Most of the time it's not very effective to reach out to somebody who works at a foundation and say, hey, I'd love to meet with you. Unfortunately, I wish it were more simple, but most of the time you need to have a connector. And so this relationship building piece. So for example, if I have my small nonprofit and I know that this prospective funder that I'd love to meet with already gives to CHEJ, I might call or email my friend Sharon and say, can you make an email introduction for me, singing my praises, singing my project's praises, so that I can get a meeting with, you know, Bob at XYZ Foundation. You will have more success that way. Sometimes there are open requests for proposals. Sometimes, you know, the cold emailing thing will work, but it's more advantageous to have somebody try to connect you. And I don't know who your fiscal sponsor is, Sandy, but that would be a place to start, going to your fiscal sponsor. Who can you connect us with? We really need to ramp up our fundraising. That would be how I would start that conversation.
Okay, this is a question from Z. Is once you get the money, where do you put it? In CDs, money markets, savings? Where do you put it?
Yeah. Well, I'm not a financial expert. Here's what I can tell you though. A couple of things. One is most organizations, unfortunately, that are smaller social justice organizations, frankly, just like don't have a lot of money to put into any of those accounts. It's going into the bank account and it's going right back out every month or every year. So I don't know if you have a lot in reserves, and maybe that's your situation. I hate to kick the can down the road, but you should talk to a financial planner. I can tell you that personally, I use, outside of my work, I use Edward Jones, and my financial planner knows my situation, which is that I'm not going to invest any of my money, like you said, in oil and gas or anything else that I find to be icky. And so he does a really good job of making investments in things that are that pass the test with me. So I think you can do it. But you're right that our system does not make it easy. What's easy is to invest in all of these industries that many of us are fighting against.
Okay, this is Cindy wants more information about your conference in September. Is it going to be in person or online? And if it is in person, when and where?
Yes, so it's in person, which is so exciting. It's in Detroit on September 26th and 27th, and I will drop the link again that has more information and the registration link. And then I'm happy to answer any questions. If you guys have them, you can totally email me. Happy to do that. And I would love to see you all there. And we're not doing online options just because, quite frankly, it costs so much money to do a hybrid model of in-person and online. And so we're just doing it in person.
Okay, what is the normal percentage for fiscal sponsorship?
I see that Dr. Sandy offered 8%. I have seen higher, so I think 8% is really good. And I can tell you that I didn't think about this earlier, but I can tell you that one fiscal sponsor organization that I really like, that I've used in the past with other clients, is State Democracy Project. So I can recommend them. I think it's just statedemocracyproject.org or .net.
Okay, it looks like we've come to all of the questions in the chat. Is there anyone on the phone? Oh, no, is any hands up? Do you see any, Hunter?
No, if someone wants to go ahead and unmute themselves and ask a question, they can.
Someone had their hand up?
No.
Oh, any questions from anyone on the phone, on the telephone? Okay. Well, we have 15 minutes left. Are there any more questions? Who's this? No. Okay. Well, now y'all can have 15 extra. Oh, wait. Oh, Mary Grace put the registration link in. We will have the slides and the chat and the recording sent to everyone who registered for this training. Thank you all for coming. And Mary Grace, thank you for a fabulous presentation.
Bye, y'all. That was fun. Have a great rest of your day. Email me. Let's stay in touch. I'll put my email address in the chat one more time, but you'll get all the info.